Good morning. My name is Sheldon Lampson, and pleased to be here and share a little bit of what I found that I think is very important. I think Ellen White talked about some of this, and it will add to what Elder Vandenberg has found, which he found very much very, very important things. Some of you asked about why Aramaic. I'm going to be very short on that because we have a lot of material to cover, unless I come another time and go in more detail on this material. Aramaic, I found, well, first of all, in the Jewish world, they say that there's a quote. Uh, they say, "Look not down on the Aramaic." They say the Holy One, blessed be He, saw fit to include the Aramaic in the law, the prophets, and the writings. Many in the Jewish world, like Messianic Jewish world especially, they play down the Aramaic because they want to emphasize the Hebrew. But they're both good languages. They're both used by God. We have the Old Testament, the Tanakh is written mostly in Hebrew, but also in Aramaic. Parts of Daniel and a few other places were in Aramaic. And also then it went translated to Greek very, very soon. So we had those three languages, Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek, for the Tanakh, the Old Testament. In the New Testament, most people, everybody knows that it was translated in the Greek. They don't usually know that it was also translated into Aramaic. And if they do, they're usually told in theology school that it's just a translation from the Greek anyway. That's not accurate. There is some truth to it. There's a Western Aramaic text and Eastern Aramaic text. They agree almost very, very, very close. Now, the Western Aramaic had a few of the manuscripts had been altered by translators to later translators. I'm not talking about originally, later translators to agree with the Greek. They quote unquote corrected it to the Greek, but it's very, very, very minor. And the Aramaic texts, all the Aramaic texts are very consistent. Um, and so we can trust the Aramaic as well as the Greek. Um, and what we will find out, there are two witnesses. I'm not saying they are the two witnesses, but they are two witnesses. We need Greek and we need Aramaic. And in some cases, very little cases, but in some cases, we need the Hebrew. Most texts we don't have the Hebrew originals for the New Testament, but in some cases we do have, and mostly when we have Aramaic, I mean Hebrew in the New Testament, they are translations from the Greek. There are a few exceptions, and sometimes those exceptions I included also. So, like the Greek and Aramaic, if you compare this little chart I have, the top of it's covered up by this. There it goes. Aramaic and Greek. The Greek Bible went west. Most people don't know the Aramaic Bible went east. There's good reasons for that. Those are the major languages in those two directions, especially in the Holy Land, it had both. The Greek was mostly for Gentiles and Hellenist Jews, Jews that are kind of, well, affected by the Greek culture and Greek language. But in the Aramaic, Jesus, Yeshua, and most Jews spoke Aramaic, as well as Jesus and the rabbis spoke Hebrew. Aramaic became a common language among the Jews because when they were in Babylon, the younger generation came along. They picked up Aramaic, 'cause that's what was spoken. It was the language of empire before Greek, and it still held sway in the eastern parts of the world. So the common Jew, when they came back from Babylon, uh, mostly understood Aramaic, which is a very close sister language to Hebrew, and they share a lot of words, but other words that don't, a lot of words that don't. The grammar is very similar, but it's different. And there's a different grammar, even somewhat, between Biblical Aramaic and New Testament Aramaic. That's what we'll talk about. So that's why I said Jesus and most Jews spoke Aramaic. And we have a lot of quotes in New Testament. They're from literally Aramaic expressions. Now, the more learned, like the rabbis in Jesus, Yeshua, they spoke also Hebrew, of course. That's why we have what's called the Aramaic Targums. Aramaic Targum just means translation. When they came back from Babylon, they would read the Torah, of course, every week, Torah of the prophets. And but they'd read it in Hebrew, the Hebrew scroll, and immediately after reading the Hebrew, they'd read the Aramaic translation so that more common people could understand more clearly. So this is very, very common. They came back from Babylon. They read the Torah in Hebrew, and then they'd read it immediately in Aramaic. So, but the Greek, it has the advantage. See, you can see my arrow kind of maybe. Greek can distinguish these two languages need each other. We need the witness of both. That's why God made a very, very full of both language. Because Greek can distinguish between definite and indefinite article. You know, like the or a. Like I have an example there. The law, the law, a law. Old Testament Aramaic can distinguish also between definite and indefinite article, but the New Testament Aramaic cannot. That's a shocker, but it lost that distinguishing factor. On the other hand, so the Greek is more handy when you want to know definite and indefinite. But however, the Greek cannot tell what kind of a Lord is being described. It says Jesus is Lord. What does that mean? Well, most Christians, that settles it as Jesus is Lord. They don't realize that kurios in Greek, that's translated Lord, can mean Lord, small l, Lord, big L, but it still can mean different things, or Lord, the Lord of heaven. So Lord can mean landowner, Lord can mean husband, all kinds of things, but the Greek can't tell you what kind of Lord is being discussed. Aramaic can. It can tell you what kind of Lord is being described, and it can tell you the certain markers, certain unique things in the language that could tell you whether it's Yod He Vav or not. So you need both of them to get the full picture. Um, Also, in the New Testament, a lot of people say, well, there's 27 books in the Greek, but we don't have the 27 books in Aramaic. Well, that is not totally true. We have 27 books in the Aramaic Testament. There were 22 in the Peshitta when the Aramaic was first written. It closed very early because the Peshitta was very early. Uh, and that was before these other 5 books were made it over to the East. But later they were added, and they some people will say, well, those are from the Greek. Well, no, there are from Greek. They're also legitimate from Aramaic ones. Those are called the 5 Crawford Aramaic manuscripts. It was Second Peter, Second, Third John, Jude, and Revelation. So we have all 27 books preserved both ways. Also in the Greek are the new I hear this a lot from the Jewish world, rabbis especially when trying to discredit the New Testament. They say the New Testament writings are anti-Semitic. So I say, are the New Testament writings anti-Semitic? As some claim, no, but the translations many times are. I don't mean necessarily that way. Maybe sometimes they are, but mostly not. It's mostly ignorance. When we look at the Aramaic, we need to distinguish. It helps us distinguish between Jewish leadership or Jew or Judean or Israelite. And in the Greek translations, most Christian translators do not distinguish between any of those. They just throw the word Judean. Judean is used by certain translator all there for every time anything's well, those five, one, two, three, I think one, five, one, two, three, 4 or 5 things I've talked about. They don't distinguish it. They always just say Judean. And most Christian translations just say Jew. That's why you have these verses about, well, the Jews killed Jesus, the Jews are this, Jews that, and it tends to be very anti-Semitic because it doesn't distinguish between the different people groups and it lays it all on the word Jew. But you get a difference in this translation. It'll try to distinguish between the two. Um, also between Jew and Gentile. We need to distinguish between Jew and Gentile because a lot of translations would just say people, the people, this, the people, that. And okay, which people are we talking about? Oh, that's those Jews. Oh, no, no, maybe it's Gentiles. Well, in this translation again, in the Aramaic at least, it's absolutely nails it one way or the other. And every time it says people in parentheses afterwards, I'll have two different words that are almost identical. Ama and ama. It has it's a mem or a double mem, or like in our language it's M. So it'll be AMMA or AMA. So I will know, I'll be able to tell in the translation immediately whether they talk about Israelites, Jews, or whether they're talking about Gentiles. So that was just a little primer there, as I know we have a lot of questions about Aramaic, and that's another day and probably another day, but that tells you at least as far as where the rubber meets the road, they both are very valuable. By the way, they agree most of the time in the translation, not always though, and that's a good thing because we'll get into it later, but that's a good thing actually. It gives us two witnesses. All right, here we go. Paul in the law. In the past, I visited a lot of churches. When I became an Adventist in junior year of high school, went off to Andrews and Walla Walla, got a couple of degrees. I ended up in LA. I got shook up in my beliefs. I got shook up, really shook up. I so I started uh, took some Greek. Later on, I would come to Texas and get Hebrew, and then later on, I'd take Hebrew again, and then I would take Aramaic, all because I was trying to put the lid back on and find out who said what is right. Who I didn't know who to believe, what to believe, but I found one common denominator. They would, especially on the Sunday churches, they would say they would always quote Paul to support the doctrine. They may support something else, but 90% of the time, at least, they're quoting Paul. But I found out I went to many, many, many different churches back then, uh, and asked the pastors, "Why do you believe what you believe?" And why did some other pastor, "Why do you believe what you believe?" And they quote different Paul verses. One group would quote these verses of Paul, another group would quote another verses of Paul, and then to each prove their doctrine. Or sometimes they quote the same verses of Paul, but translate them differently or teach them differently. I like, well, what in the world? How am I ever get to this figured out? And anyway, it was Paul versus Paul. And I say, and a lot of one pastor actually told me, we have more Paul verses than they do. That proves they're right or something. I said, well, if Paul doesn't agree with Paul, then we have a bigger problem, don't we? He didn't bother him at all. They got more Paul verses than the other church has. So why the confusion and how do we get there? So I listed three or four verses for anti-Paul, Paul's anti-law statements and Paul's pro-law statements. For as many as are of the works of the law under the curse. For it is written, Cursed is everyone that continueth not in all things which are written in the book of the law to do them. Another one, these are all taken from the King James Version. Nothing against the King James. Matter of fact, you'll find this in 99% of any translation you have of what we're going to find out. And I'm still having this um, okay, another one was that's Galatians 3:10. Another verse, and he be found in him, not having mine own righteousness, which is of the law, but that which is through the faith of Christ, the righteousness which is of God by faith, Philippians 3:9. And whoops, this only would I learn for you. Receive ye the Spirit by the works of the law, or by hearing of faith. So those are the kind of verses they're going to go to and do go to prove that Paul, if uh, if Jesus didn't do away with the law, then definitely he instructed Paul to do so. But then you go to the other verses of Paul and you get pro-law stuff. The law, therefore, is holy, and the commandment holy, and just and good. Romans 7:12. For we know that the law is spiritual, but I am carnal and sold under sin. Romans 7:14. You hear that a lot, you guys are interested in the letter of the law. We follow the spirit of the law. He says we know the law is spiritual. So Paul didn't have a problem with saying the law is spiritual. Also, another one is, for not the hearers of the law are righteous before Allah or God. Allah is the word in Aramaic for Lord, for God, the word God in English. It's not Arabic. Arabic is Allah. Aramaic is Allah, and biblical Old Testament Aramaic is Elah, like ELAH. So they're sister languages, all three, Hebrew, Aramaic, and Arabic. It doesn't mean you're in one religion or the other. So Allah is legitimate, is the word in New Testament Aramaic for God in general. Uh, and I could go into more on that. More, for not the hearers of the law are righteous before Allah, before God, but the doers of the law are justified. So this I wrote AIV. That's just initials of all Israel Bible version. So we have a warning by Peter. First of all, I should have quoted it, but in the Bible I did, and inside the front cover or second page or so, it mentions how they changed the order of the books about 1600 years ago. Um, that was done by Jerome. He was the secretary of Pope Damasus, and he was told to reorder the books. So they put Paul's books. You have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the four Gospels, then the book of Acts. And then you had originally, you say, how could you have original? They're just scrolls, but they eventually put them in a book form. Um, so you had the four Gospels, book of Acts, and then you had the Jewish, the like James, Peter, John, and Jude, all the apostles that were sent to the Jewish world primarily or predominantly had first. And James, of course, he was a brother of Yeshua. Jude was also, but James was considered, when Yeshua left for heaven, he was considered the Nasi, or the president of the movement. So you would have James first, and you would have certain warnings in James, and you would have certain warnings in Peter about how to interpret Paul properly. Well, we can't have that, so we threw those in the back of the book. And so instead, the Pope that had Jerome to make after the book of Acts would it be all of Paul's writings. And then afterwards, those books would be just before the book of Revelation, the other books. And that was done on purpose. That was so that you could read Paul without the filters, so that you could understand Paul properly. This would enable them to understand Paul whatever way they felt like having you understand Paul. So, but Peter did give us a warning, 2 Peter, our beloved brother Paul shall, according to the wisdom which has been given to him, has written to you. As in all his letters, he speaks concerning these, in which there are some things difficult to understand. Those who are without instruction, I looked into that instruction. Like the word Torah, you think of Torah, you think of the word law, but really it means instruction primarily. It contains law, but its usage has given it the kind of the definition of law, but its actual primary definition is instruction. So for those who are without instruction and are unstable, pervert them, what? The writings of Paul, as also the other scriptures, to their own destructions. You therefore, my beloved, knowing this before, guard yourselves so that you will not fall from your pillars. Interesting. That word in Aramaic can be pillars as well as other words. Going after the error of those who are lawless. It parallels those who are without instruction and lawless. So this changing will turn us to an understanding if we're not very careful of interpreting Paul to be lawless or against the Torah. I put this in here, and it's going to be very hard to read it because I have to move. It covers up my stuff. But I have, these are, if I put this on the side, maybe. I don't know. Anyway, there it goes. Some rabbinic terms. We need to understand Paul better. We need a class in Rabbinic Judaism 101. But we're not going to quite do that right now, but we'll get some basic definitions. If we know these definitions, some of them will be game changers. Like I have minhag here. That means custom, or any practice performed on 3 consecutive occasions, which then becomes binding. This is in Rabbinic Judaism. Like the kippah was worn by force originally, because of the Catholic world forced them to wear kippahs. Look a whole lot like what the Pope is wearing. But then once they got free from that, they called it a minhag, a custom, because they wore it on more than 3 occasions. So then there's the learned commandments, laws of the Pharisees, the rabbis, invented by men. Now, I say Pharisees slash rabbis because what the Pharisees taught back in Jesus' day has been continued down through time by what was the rabbis, and they had rabbis back then. So I use Pharisee slash rabbis. They're not equivalent, but they're basically equivalent. And the laws of the Pharisees, rabbis, laws invented by men. So it can sometimes mean laws invented by men in general, but most of the time when it's used, it means laws of the Pharisees. Then you go to Masim, that means literally works or deeds or precedents of the rabbis. And then you have the oral law or oral Torah. The Mishnah, Talmud, Midrash, before it was written down, the rabbis claim that the law that was given to Mount Sinai, I don't believe this now, I used to. They believe that when the law was given to Mount Sinai, what was written down, by Moses, and we got 10 Commandments in the Torah, that there was also a oral law given to explain how to to expound on everything. And so they that's called talking about reforms, man-made laws, enactments, commandments, tradition of the elders, the rabbis. Jesus speaks about the tradition of the elders, sometimes makes the law of God a none effect. And then 3 words or phrases that will be big for us today. One's called works of law. It means performing works according to the laws of the Pharisees, rabbis. Let that sink in a little. And then under law, so also in law, born in law, not under law or in law, under the interpretation and observance of the laws of the Pharisees, rabbis. And then halakha, the collective body of Jewish religious law. It's kind of like the rabbinic constitution, which is not the same as understanding Torah, like we read in the Tanakh, in the Old Testament, in the Genesis through Deuteronomy. It's not the same. They overlap. Some parts are the same, or they. But the halakha is the actual term. Halakha would be like some pronounce halakha, depends on the flavor, whether it's Sephardic or Ashkenazi. It means the collective body. It means how do you walk out something? How do you, from the holek, to walk it out? How do you keep the Sabbath? How do you do this and that? By the rabbi's interpretation. And let's move on. Now things will start coming together, I think. First of all, just about everybody, Christians, and especially we've had different pastors, different denominations, they all have a different reason why Paul doesn't seem to be able to say things to where everybody can understand it, and why he can't be consistent with himself, or maybe he's confused, or or have bad motives. I mean, really crazy stuff you hear, but they all trying to figure out why they can't understand things. Well, let's look into that. Paul was chosen. First of all, he's not just some guy that couldn't express himself. He was chosen by the Father and the Son for the task of taking the gospel to those among the nations. If that's an expression, mostly like the tribes were spread out, lost among the nations, as well as to the nations. Paul was uniquely qualified to explain the issues involving halakha, how one should walk out the commandments, especially as it applies to new situations, like Jews and non-Jews interacting and fellowshipping together, with rabbinic law had mostly forbidden. So there was a law by one of the rabbinic um, communities. They had like Hillel and Shammai. Shammai had passed 18 measures which forbid a Jew to eat with a non-Jew, and it forbid the Jew to go into the home of a non-Jew, even if it's a holy Jew. Doesn't matter, can't do that. So Paul is seeing the situation where believers, Jewish and Gentile, were coming to faith in Yeshua, Jesus, and he's getting pushback from the rabbinic people. Oh, why doing such a thing is forbidden by rabbinic law, and he has to look into this from Jesus' perspective and Jesus' teaching, and he starts clarifying this thing. We'll find out later that by its nature will be difficult, just like making a new law on anything, a new situation. But this in particular, many translators not understanding these issues that Paul was dealing with and the taking and the talking or deciding about, rendered Paul's words according to their own misunderstanding and doctrine. I can't read my bottom line here. And some translators, it seems, rendered Paul according to not to, it seems, according to what they wanted Paul to say. Now, here I have 5 slides that most of you will recognize. I borrowed them from Elder Vandenberg's work because he was really on this stuff. He was a trailblazer. I believe what we're talking about, the things we're talking about, is Ellen White talked about the 4th angel, the 3 angels' message. After these things, I saw another angel come down from heaven, having great power, and the earth was lighted with his glory. She said, if we would receive the light of the glorious angel that shall lighten the earth with his glory, let us see to it that our hearts are cleansed and emptied of self. So this seems to be a prerequisite, and turn towards heaven that they may be ready for the latter rain. And as she continues, the Spirit is poured out upon all who yields to its promptings, and casting off all man's machinery and binding rules and cautious methods, they will declare the truth with the might of the Spirit's power. And says multitudes receive the faith. And
look, let me show you something up here. Make that little, minimize that, and that'll go under. See right there?
Oh, right here.
Right up here. There.
Okay, there. Okay, she got a little more help. Multitudes receive the faith and join the armies of the Lord. So they will declare the truth. There's a lot of different things that people consider truth, but I think we can all agree on just what Peter talked about. We have these pillars of our faith. The more light will come, but it will not alter those pillars. And I listed these pillars. I think you're familiar all with them. The second advent, Seventh-day Sabbath, 3 angels' messages, the sanctuary in heaven, non-immortality of the wicked, baptism and the Lord's Supper, the state of the dead, creation and the creator, the perpetuity of the law. We have just a couple more. We must not for a moment think there is no more light, no more truth to be given us. We are in danger of becoming careless by our indifference, losing the sanctifying power of truth, and composing ourselves with the thought, I am rich and increase with goods and have need of nothing. And she wrote this in the last year of her life on earth. So 1915, the year of her death, she said these things were still coming, more light. Although we have in trust the grandest and most important truth ever presented to the world, things like I just quoted, we are only babes as far as understanding truth in all its bearings is concerned. And there in Psalms 119, all thy commandments are righteous. The question has been asked me, do you think the Lord has any more light for us to as a people? I answered that he has light that's new to us, and yet it is precious old light that is to shine forth from the word of truth. We have only the glimmerings of the rays of light that is yet to come to us. So I know the group there has more light already. I think what I have to share today, if I don't run out of time, is will complement this. It's very different, but it'll complement this. Great truths that have lain unheeded and unseen since the day of Pentecost are to shine from God's word in the native purity. Interesting, since they've lain unheeded and unseen since the days of Pentecost. We're talking about Paul. Pentecost really got the gospel rolling, but very, very, very soon, right after that happened with the stoning of Stephen, Paul was holding the clothing of some of the men so they could stone Stephen to death. So Paul was in this from the beginning, but until he got visited on the road to Damascus, and he had the light of Yeshua shine on him. And he was downloaded, what you're going to, from here on, you're going to support this movement. And what he had to say, what he was shown how to view the halakha of Jews and Gentile and the gospel was totally unique because we're dealing with a situation that should be unique from that time to our day, but it has been messed with slightly. One more page of this. Let no one come to the conclusion that there is no more truth to be revealed. The diligent, prayerful seeker for truth will find precious rays of light yet to shine forth from the word of God. So it's going to be in our Bible. Many gems are yet scattered and to be yet gathered together to become the property of the remnant people of God. This one is a little more direct. Said my guide, there is much light yet to shine forth from what? The law of God and the gospel of righteousness. The message understood in its true character and proclaimed to the Spirit will lighten the earth with its glory. The law of God and the gospel of righteousness. We will find in 4 books there was a subtle altering of what Paul said regarding the law of God and the gospel of righteousness. This occurs in Romans chapters 2, 3, 4, 6, and 9. It occurs in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, in Galatians chapters 2, 3, 4, and 5, and Philippians chapter 3. Very, very subtle changes in what Paul said makes a huge difference in what Paul means. I'll go to one here. I said in the book of Romans, right, subheading I write without law, in law, the law. First, I'm showing the King James on Romans 2:12, then I show what I did in the AIV. I haven't read what was added by translators. Now, how in the world, you should ask, how do I know that it was added? Maybe it wasn't added. Maybe I'm taking it out. How do you know? Well, we'll get to that in a few seconds. But remember, I said the Aramaic of the Old Testament can tell you the or a definite article, indefinite article, but the New Testament Aramaic cannot. That's a big deal. I'm translating from the Aramaic. How in the world could I tell whether it's sinned in law or the law or in the law or how would you know? You just guess. No, we don't do that. Oh, you just go by whatever theology is. Well, you can't do that. Well, you have to refer to the Greek for that information. That's why I said the Greek and the Aramaic complement one another. Where one can't tell you something specifically, the other can. And then God and Lord and different levels of God intention, you have to go to the Aramaic. So we have in the King James from the Greek. And by the way, I looked in both Greeks. There's a Greek from the like King James, New King James. Before that, Tyndale, and before that, I mean, after that, you had Geneva. All those were translated from the Textus Receptus, or which is a subset of what we call majority text Greek. So that says this, and that's translated for that Greek. Then I said to myself, oh, how do I know the other Greek of the United Bible Society, Nestle Allen, and Westcott and Hort stuff doesn't say the other? Well, they happen to agree in this particular stuff. So the Greek says, for as many as have sinned without law shall also perish without law, and as many as have sinned in the law shall be judged by the law. For not the doers, hearers of the law are just before God, but the doers of the law shall be justified. I was translating, I was about 2/3 of the way through translating the New Testament when that thought came into my mind. I believe it's from the Lord. It says, did you check the thus? No, I haven't. So I had to go back and check the whole thing. And I started finding these things. And also Spirit or the Spirit or Holy Spirit, these things make a difference. So I found this should read actually what Paul directly said without trying to help Paul make one doctrine versus the other. For they who have sinned, he's talking about two different classes of people and the laws that they go by. He's not just talking about theory. For they who have sinned without law, the Gentile, the pagan, without law also will perish. And they who have sinned in law, not in the law, in law, by law will be judged. So he's comparing the pagan world, they living and sinning without law, to the Jewish world who are living and sinning in law. And those who sin in law will be those who sinned in law by law will be judged. That's a reference to Pharisaic rabbinic law. It's one of the idioms. It's an Aramaic Hebrew idiom. It predates Paul by about 100 years, Dead Sea Scroll. In my translation, I reference this stuff. It's more detailed. So he's referring to the Jew and the non-Jew. They're two worlds. They're two laws they're born under. You're either born without law or you're born under rabbinic law, in law. So you'll be judged by that law. However, the two groups he just mentioned in verse 13, he compares something different to those two laws. For not the hearers of the law are righteous before God, but the doers of the law are justified. And this goes through all the locations I've talked about, I mentioned. And so if I go now, what I'm doing today, if I won't even have time to finish this. This is the overview. If you want me to come again, I can go through each of these books. Romans is a big book one time, and Galatians is a pretty big book another time. And 1 Corinthians chapter 9 is very short, and Philippians is very short. So they could be grouped like that, and we go into detail. But for now, I'm just trying to compare things to give you an idea of what is in store. Romans 2:14, for when the Gentiles, which have not the law, do by nature the things contained in the law, these having not the law are a law unto himself, and so forth. But actually what Paul wrote, for if the people of nations, and I'm distinguishing between Jew and non-Jew, not just the people. For if the people doesn't tell you who it's talking about. So afterwards, I have AMMA, that in Aramaic is non-Israels, non-Jews, one of the tribes or Jews. But when it has one M, when it has two, it's always the people nations. So if the people nations, or if the people nations who have not law, see the parallel from what we read a second ago. He was talking about the pagans, or those without Jewish understanding, and not without the law, the God of heaven, and following his ways. He uses the phrase, they have not law from their nature. So for if the people who have not law shall from their nature shall perform the law, these, while not having law, so they don't even have the law that the Jews have, a rabbinic law, to themselves are a law. And these show the work of the law, as is written upon their hearts. This is amazing. It says that and talking about Gentiles and possibly lost sheep of Israel. But that word that for people is Gentiles. So some of the people coming home from the lost sheep of Israel, from the lost tribes, are considered Gentiles by the Jews. So it's interesting that prophecy in Jeremiah, it talks about the law being written on the heart of Judah and Israel. But here it's applying it to Gentile. And these show the work of the law as is written upon their hearts, and their conscience testifies of them, while their reasonings accord, what was the word? Things in my way here. Excuse one another. So you see the distinctions that are in Paul. He's writing law. He's writing understanding that Jesus gave him to apply to these unique situations. That's why he's paralleling these different groups and these different laws. But we lose it when we change law to the law, because what happens because of these four books, what happens, the fruit of this is the Christian world in general takes what Paul says in these four books and see the law is a bad thing, and the Gentiles definitely are not under the law. They just go by what Jesus says, and they get away from the law, and under the law you're under curse. They come up with that equation. That's not what Paul said. And also Judaism uses that idea also, because Judaism teaches the law is only for the Jews or converts. But Paul had a different theology than either one. So this affects a lot of things. It also will take away the proof texts that people that teach the law is done away with in most of Christianity use these four books, because they have been altered subtly to agree with their theology. And later I will show who and how it was done. Romans 2:23, for thou makest thy boast of the law. Now he's talking to Jew. It sounds like he's talking about the Torah. He's talking of the law of Moses. And thou makest thy boast of the law. Through breaking the law dishonorest thou God, and so forth. But if you read it in Aramaic, the way and translate it literally with the Greek thus and a's. And you who boast in law, So the Jew, in this instance, is boasting that they have law, they have rabbinic law, they follow, and it's not one-to-one with the law of Moses. Most rabbis will tell you it is, but when you get in the inner circle, they'll tell you, no, 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 you don't follow the Torah. You follow us. We were given the authority to alter it, to expand on it, to shorten it, to change it, and you must follow us. We have the keys. Sound familiar? We have the keys. If you're a Jew or you become a Jew, a convert, according to that law, you must follow the rabbis. No, 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 don't look at don't look at Torah specific and follow that. And I can show that also. And you who boast in law, i.e., rabbinic law, when you transgress the law, and you who boast in law, i.e., rabbinic law, when you transgress the law, Torah, do you dishonor God? So you're boasting in rabbinic law, but you're not keeping the law. For the name of God through you is blasphemed among the people nations, the Amma, as it is written, for circumcision profits if law you practice, not the law, like they translate up in King James and the other Bibles. For circumcision profits, this is talking about a convert, a Gentile converting to under rabbinic supervision. For circumcision profits if you practice law, if law you practice. In other words, if you follow rabbinic law, circumcision profits. But if you transgress law, rabbinic law, your circumcision becomes uncircumcision. That's kind of confusing, but not really. Because what he's saying, because I know people that this specifically would apply to. They converted, they're Gentile, they converted under rabbinic supervision to become a Jew. But they have one little problem. If they ever question rabbinic law, from then on, the Orthodox community can render their circumcision invalid. So for circumcision profits if law you practice. But if you transgress law, rabbinic law, your circumcision becomes uncircumcision. You see how it fits. You see how Paul is dealing with these nuances. And it just goes on. I'm about out of time. So I guess, do we have to um, do we have to roll up? Do we have to? We need to stop soon so the next speaker can speak, or leeway of some sort, or maybe we can continue at another time.
You can keep going, Sheldon. Don't worry. Just finish what you have.
Okay. All right. So here's Romans 2:26. Therefore, if the uncircumcision keeps the righteousness of the law, shall not his uncircumcision be counted for circumcision? So he's talking about a non-Jew who's not circumcised, but he is counted as though he is because it's a heavenly circumcision keeping the law. So instead, thou shall not uncircumcision, which by nature, if it fulfill the law, judge thee, talking about those who are circumcised but don't keep the law because they're keeping a law or rabbinic law. So who by letter and circumcision does transgress the law. And you have quotes from Yeshua, from Jesus, with the Pharisees in a number of times. You know, he says, and I have those quoted, but that's so much to cover, where they have, by their rabbinic law, by their customs, by their traditional law, they contradict the Torah, they contradict the law. So if I render it the way Paul did with does or not does, but if the uncircumcision shall keep the commandment of the law, the Torah, is not the uncircumcision reckoned to him circumcision? And the uncircumcision who by nature accomplishes the law will judge you, he'll judge you, the Jew, who with the scripture by letter and with circumcision transgress law. Law, when it's just the way it is written, law, can mean law in general. It usually means man-made law and usually means the rabbinic law. So you transgress against the law, even though you're doing your rabbinic thing. Therefore, by the deeds, this one you're familiar with, therefore, by the deeds of the law, there shall no flesh be justified in his sight, for by the law is the knowledge of sin. But now the righteousness of God without the law is manifested, being witnessed by the law and the prophets. So, because by works of law, by rabbinic law, no flesh is justified. Why does this keep coming up and coming up and coming up? If you look in the book of Acts, it keeps coming up in the book of Acts. Paul didn't write the book of Acts. His traveling buddy did. But you have this situation over and over and over and over. Rabbinic law being mandated that the Gentile believers now must keep it. They're not trying to have the Gentile keep Torah. They're trying to keep rabbinic law. And Paul said no. And that goes into detail. It's a long study also. But now without law, because by works of law, no flesh is justified before him. For through law, rabbinic law is, in this case, is law in general. For through law is full knowledge of sin. But now without law, a righteousness of God has been revealed, being witnessed by the law and the prophets. It's kind of confusing, but it's not when you get used to this. If we had time to do this slow, it would make a difference. So basically, works of law, rabbinic law, no flesh will be justified. It creates a pseudo-righteousness. You look good, dress nice, and you don't go to the bar, hopefully, and hang out and carouse and stuff. But it's not, not the law and the prophets. They're two parallel systems. One brings righteousness, belief in Yeshua and following his way, which includes the Torah and the prophets, and one that is mimicking some things and denies Yeshua. By the way, when you get circumcised and keep rabbinic law, because now you're a rabbinic Jew, you must renounce Yeshua. That's why Paul says, therefore I tell you, if you go ahead and get circumcised, you'll be a debtor to keep the whole law. He's talking about rabbinic law. Of course, the thing is, the Torah applies to Jew and non-Jew. The question here is this works of law that's being foisted on them. Let's see. Okay, then I had another one. For the promise that he should be heir, the heir of the world was not to Abraham or to his seed through the law, but through the righteousness of faith. For if they which are of the law be heirs, it's actually, I'm just saying, this is what Paul wrote, for not through law was the promise unto Abraham and to his seed that he should be the heir of the world, but through a righteousness of faith. For if they who are of law be heirs, so that the rabbis teach that they are heirs. If you're born Jewish or you become Jewish through rabbinic law, you are heirs and you got a ticket to heaven. They call the world to come. That's not true. Jesus and also John the Immerser said it's not true. For not through law, rabbinic law, was the promise to Abraham and to his seed that he should be the heir of the world, but through a righteousness of faith, For if they who are of law be heirs, they say they are of heirs because they keep rabbinic law. Faith will be unprofitable and the promise be abolished. Now also, for the law, Torah, is a fruit of faith in Christ. But he does compare that sometimes, but 90% of these that we're used to him supposedly comparing and calling it a curse if you keep it, is not talking about the Torah law of Moses, talking about rabbinic law. For sin shall not have dominion over you. For sin shall not have dominion over you, for ye are not under the law, but under grace. See, they're opposed to each other. What then? Shall we sin because we are not under the law, but under grace? God forbid. Actually, he said, for sin shall not have power over you, for you are not under law, but under grace. What then? Shall we sin because we are not under law, but under grace? The Gentiles were never under law. A verse later, Paul will describe that situation. He came to those, he was born under law, not under the law, like the verse translations say. He was born under law, under rabbinic system. This was the law of the land. You had to obey it or you get lashings or whatever. He was born under law that he may redeem those under law. For sin shall not have power over you, for you are not under law, but under grace. Those two are opposed to each other, being under law and being under grace. If you knuckle down and keep the rabbinic law, they tell you, got a ticket to heaven. But it's not. It's opposed to grace. And because you have not the hearers of the law are justified, but the doers of the law. And Yeshua over and over and over says, by your rabbinic law, you made the law of God of none effect. And we're almost done with Romans. But Israel, which followed after, this says the law, a law of righteousness, but read it the way it was. But Israel, who followed after a rabbinic law, I added the word rabbinic, but I put it in italics. Do you notice that when they add these words, they don't tell you? Not every Bible translation tells you when they add words. Usually they tell you, but there sometimes they tell you. But the ones that tell you, I add italics so you'll know, but it's my addition. You can read it with or without the addition and see what you think's better. But if the translator thinks it's better with that added word, I always tell you and put it in italics. And the Bible, like King James, which is my kind of one of my favorites, never tells you. It does tell you. It tells you where it adds words, except in these 4 books. And now none of the others tell you either. I haven't checked every Bible in existence, but I've checked quite a few. So, but Israel, who followed after a rabbinic law of righteousness, unto a law of righteousness, have not attained. For why? Because it was not by faith, but by works of law. For they stumbled at the stone of stumbling. We don't need Jesus. We got the oral law. Our rabbis handed it down from Pharisees. That's it. It's not faith. It's just obedience. Obedience to rabbinic law. They have a law, but they followed after a rabbinic law of righteousness. But by doing so, unto a law of righteousness have not attained. Why? Because it was not by faith, but by works of law. For they stumbled at the stone of stumbling. Do you see how it changes the game? The laws and Yeshua are not against one another. Okay, we're done with and this one thing will get us through 1 Corinthians. it's in Corinthians, 1 Corinthians chapter 9, as you see. And unto the Jews. Now here are these scenarios that Paul's working out law, legality. And unto the Jews I became as a Jew, that I might gain the Jews. How does it do that? To them that are under law, not under the law. As I read the one down, and I become with the Jews as a Jew, that the Jew I may gain, and with them who are under law, I became as one under law. So he kept rabbinic law, even though he knew he didn't have to. He could get along with them so that he could win them. That them who are under law I may gain. And to those who have not law, here's a Jew now talking about the Gentile. And to those who have not law, I became as one without law, while I am not without law unto God, but in law of Christ. That them also who have not law I may gain. Do you see the comparisons? It gets lost when they stick those in and change the subject. And then we go to Galatians. Look at all the thus.
Let's read it with those. Knowing that a man is not justified by the works of the law, but by the faith of Jesus Christ. Even we have believed in Jesus Christ, that we might be justified by the faith of Christ and not by the works of the law. For the works of the law shall no flesh be justified, as opposed to what he really said, because we know that a man is not justified by works of law, rabbinic works of law. It doesn't justify, it gives you pseudo righteousness, but it doesn't change your heart. And you have to receive Shua first, and then Jesus first, and then walk it out, because the Spirit is in you, walking it out. And that is obedience to what was revealed in the law of Moses and the Ten Commandments. Because we know that a man is not justified by rabbinic works of law, but by the faithfulness of Jesus Christ. Also in him, in Jesus Christ, we believed that from the faithfulness of Jesus Christ, we may be justified, and not from rabbinic works of law. Because from rabbinic works of law shall no flesh be justified. It's consistent with other verses in other places now. Because Jesus says later that the Jewish man that comes to Yeshua, Jesus says, what do I got to do to be saved, to make it to heaven? He says, keep the law. Interesting. But I'm not teaching the law without Christ. I'm teaching these distinctions. Look in the Greek. This be good. We have to see this. You can take my word for it. I don't recommend you take anybody's word for anything. We're all iron sharpens iron, hopefully in love. Right here, we got the same verse. So right here, by, can you see my arrow? Hope you can see my arrow. By works of law. That's funny. Shouldn't it say by the works of the law? Oh, no, it's not in the text. Okay. I don't know why. By works of law, except, let's see, I need to start up earlier. Knowing that not is justified. So man is not justified. So knowing that not is justified a man by works of law, except through faith, Jesus Christ. Even we in Christ Jesus believed that we may be justified by faith in Christ and not of works of law, because not will be justified by works of law, all flesh. So no one will be justified by works of law. And this would be good to have if you've had Greek or not had Greek, these are, the first one says Greek definite articles. These are singular form. I took Greek a long time ago, so kind of fuzzy, a little fuzzy. It'll tell you masculine, feminine, neuter, single form, plural form down here. And you can, first of all, you find out they're not in there where they claim they are, and you can verify this. And I have about 5 different interlinear Bibles, Greek, English, some from one family of Greek, some from another family of Greek, and they all agree on this subject. God didn't allow them to mess that up. So we can know what Paul said. The interlinear Bible, I like this one because it has a Greek text, and then it has the English equivalent underneath. And it has a Strong's Concordance number. That's handy. Some don't, most don't have that. They have 2 out of 3. And some interlinears won't tell you anything about whether the or a is there. They somehow manage to forget to include that information, but the ones I have all do. This is a big deal. So they teach, the rabbinic community teaches it's not a faith thing, it's an obedience thing. And that's why you obey the rabbis. But what if one rabbi disagrees with a different rabbi? Well, what am I supposed to follow? Oh, pick a rabbi, and everything, whatever he tells you, you must obey it. And you'll have a place in the world to come in heaven. That's one thing they teach. That's why Paul is pitting faith in Jesus Christ versus rabbinic law. Oh, the rabbis also teach something that makes a few verses make sense. Rabbinic Judaism teaches that after the Tanakh or the Old Testament closed, the spirit of prophecy stopped. Since then, must rely on the rabbi's teaching. Interesting. How does that fly with what Paul says next? This only would I learn of you. Received ye the Spirit by the works of the law or by the hearing of faith? King James and the AIV says, this only would I know from you. Through rabbinic works of law, received you the Spirit or through the hearing of faith? And next verse, verse 5, instead of verse 2, 3 verse 5. He therefore that ministers to you the Spirit and worketh miracles among you, doeth he it by the works of the law or by the hearing of faith? See, the works of law, Torah, that's contrary to faith. No, it's not, because that's not what Paul said. Then he who imparted to you the Spirit and wrought miracles among you, did he so through rabbinic works of law or through the hearing of faith? Can't have one with it. You have to make a choice. And now we're getting into Galatians, if I may. I know all this is a lot, and it just gives you the gravity of what we're dealing with. We that believe the law is not done away with, we have had to come up with the right answer despite what Paul said in these 4 books. Yeah, I know he said this, and it kind of sounds like the law is done away, but really in the other book, he clearly says the law is not done away. So therefore, and the other people that are anti-law, they go to these 4 books. What a coincidence. And if you show them something else, not from these 4 books, I don't care. I got my books, you got yours, I got this Paul. Paul seems to not be able to explain himself. No, Paul was very exact, like a lawyer would be. He was a student of Gamaliel. He was head. He really was pick of the litter, except his theology was very anti-Gentile until Yeshua gave him full theology. For as many as are of the works of the law are under a curse. And actually says the curse. For as many as are of the works of the law are under the curse. For it is written, cursed every one that continueth not in all things which are written in the book of the law to do them. Wow, so doing Torah, doing the law of Moses is contrary. You're under curse if you keep it. That's not what Paul said. For they who are of works of law, when I say rabbinic works of law, are under the curse. For it is written, cursed is everyone who does not all that is written in the law. Paul just happens to not need our help. He says everything exactly. But when the fullness of time was come, God sent his son, made of a woman, made under the law, to redeem them that were under the law. Make it sound like Jews only are under the law. That we might, but not the Gentiles, that we might receive the adoption of sons. But Paul said, really, but when the fullness of the time had come, God sent his son and made from a woman and made under law, that them who were under law he might redeem, and we might receive the adoption of sons. Tell me, ye that desire to be under the law, do you not hear the law? That doesn't quite sound right and contrary to each other. Tell me, you who are willing to be under law, do you hear the law? Because following your under law spiel will not be obedient to the law. But if ye be led of the Spirit, ye are not under the law. But if by Spirit you are led, you are not under law. Remember, the rabbis said, there is no more spirit of prophecy. When the Old Testament closed, when the Tanakh closed, when Malachi said his last, there's no spirit of prophecy. You must obey the rabbis. It's not a thing about faith. It's not a thing about spirit. It's about obedience to the rabbis. But if by spirit you are led, then you are not under law. And Philippians, we're almost done. and be found in him, not having mine own righteousness, which is of the law. That's that law of Moses thing, but that which is through the faith of Christ, the righteousness which is of God by faith, and be found in him, not having mine own righteousness. It says over and over and over, it talks about Paul. I have other verses where Paul talks about they have their own righteousness, which doesn't lead to salvation. And be found in him, not having mine own righteousness, which is of Pharisaic rabbinic law, or without Pharisaic rabbinic is of law, but that which is by faith in Christ, which is righteousness, that is from God. And these verses, we don't need to look them up. Maybe you can look them up on your own. It's Yeshua over and over and over, confronting the rabbis and their works of law, their laws that they're trying to put onto the people. And they contradict Torah in those instances. And he says, by your customs, your traditions, your laws, you are making the law of God of none effect. I'll show you this real quick, and we go, if I have another time, another chance, I could do this in detail. I made this thing. I start saying, well, where did this lie, this confusion, where did this come from? Where did it originate? It led me to Tyndale, Geneva, King James, New King James, modern English Bibles, the Greek received texts, the New Greek, Nessa Allen, United Bible Societies, Westcott Hort. It led me back to Martin Luther, John Wycliffe, back to the Latin Vulgate, to the Old Latin. And I could do the play by play when we have another time. And how I did one that was based off of looking up, it was mostly from the Aramaic Peshitta, but it had to reference the Greek. And I referenced both Greeks, and I saw no difference for what this was. And occasionally the New Testament Hebrew, the few that we have that are legitimate, that are give extra insight. I utilize that too, but I show when I utilize the footnotes. Anyway, this whole thing needs some explanation. That takes some time. And then I had this just for fun. Greek language, Hebrew language, Aramaic were used in the Tanakh, the Old Testament. Latin, and they're also the Greek, Hebrew, and Aramaic are used in the New Testament. The way of the Lord, the way of Messiah, the way of Christ. But Latin and Roman got off on and off ramp. Now, here's some pro-law, non-Paul. This is Yeshua, Jesus. But if you will enter life, keep the commandments. And another one, this was from John, but John got it from an angel who got it from Yeshua and the Father. Here is the patience of the holy ones who keep the commandments of God and the faith of Yeshua. And from King David, the law of the Lord is perfect. It's perfect. Converting the soul. The testimony of the Lord is sure, making wise the simple. It's not a curse. The statutes of the Lord are right, which you guys are knowledgeable of this. The statutes of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart. The commandment of the Lord is pure, enlightening the eyes. The fear of the Lord is clean, enduring forever. The judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. More to be desired are they than gold, yea, than much fine gold, sweeter also than honey and the honeycomb. Moreover, by them is thy servant warned. Peter tried to warn us. Moreover, by them is thy servant warned, and in keeping of them there is great reward. Who can understand his errors? Cleanse thou me from secret faults. Keep back thy servant also from presumptuous sins. Let them not have dominion over me. Then shall I be upright, and I shall be innocent from the great transgression. Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer.
Thank you so much for that. I have just been reading through the books of Paul, and my Bible keeps telling me the is added, the is added, the is, and I keep wondering why. Now I understand.
Yeah, if sometime I have a little more time, I can go in and or I could even say it now if I had time. If I go back to that graph I traced it back in time. It happened from the Old Latin, which are Latin manuscripts are pretty old, and the Jerome, commissioned by the Pope, the emphasis, he was a secretary of the Pope, um, to translate the Old Latin to the Latin Vulgate, and all that was written accordingly. And the first translator into English from the Latin was, in my memory, was, oh boy, I have him on the chart there. He translated Latin to English, and he has that problem. He puts it that way. So everything from then on copied, used the previous translator and changed whatever they changed, but they kept that intact. But I couldn't put 100% blame on Jerome, though, because Latin is not able to distinguish, believe it or not, the from a. But so the translation into English, though, got it wrong and got it the way the Latin is rendered with that slant, anti-law slant that comes from papacy.
Yeah, Sheldon, I realized that back in the Old Testament, because when you say the God, that means that there's one. When you say a God, that means that there's more than one God. It's the same thing.
Amen.
Well, thank you very much, Sheldon.
If I remember correctly, in the parable of the rich young ruler, Yeshua, which law? Because Christ said, keep the commandments. And he said, well, which?
Yes.
And I think that might be an indicator also of
Yes.
rabbinic law or Torah.
That's right.
Which one are you talking about?
That's a really good one. Yeah, you're right. Mm-hmm.
I never
Never
knew why
thought
he
that.
asked which. I'm like, all of them silly,
Yeah.
but
That's true.
now I understand what
Especially
he
a
was
Jew.
asking.
Especially the Jew is asking him that, so he had to clarify which answer do you want?
Yeah.
Perfect. That's good. So I think this information, coupled with what you guys have from Elder Vandenberg, which gives you a lot, it completes it, because we have the statutes returning and the festivals, and we have Paul being consistently knocks it out of the ballpark, because the other side that's very anti-law can't lean on those verses anymore. If we can show them legitimately what they say, then they're consistently all pro-law. And maybe he warns maybe here and there about misusing the law, but those are very few, and that's a good valid. But yes.
Hello, can I say something? Shabbat Shalom. This
Shabbat Shalom.
Jewish Adventist friend Mark here, calling from Baltimore, Maryland. As a Jewish believer in Yeshua, I agree with everything you said is correct. I just want to add that there are people. I live in the traditional Jewish community here in Baltimore, and unfortunately, the New Testament, in Hebrew called the Bris Hadashah, it's a forbidden book. But I have read, and I'm happy to tell you accounts of Jewish folks who, under the covers or whenever, in hidden places, have looked at the book and have became believers in Yeshua. So it's a powerful book once they get hold of it, and when they're in. So it has miracles do happen. Big company, even though in the Orthodox world it's not even acknowledged or it's forbidden and so forth. So I know how difficult it is. I'm just telling you what it is. So, but it is a working power. So I just ask you to feel us on that. So thank you so much for your explanation, Mazel Tov.
Praise the Lord.